University. Professor Han Yunyu from University of Hawaii. Professor Tasao Luxintun from Academia Sinica. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I want to start my remarks today by thanking Diallo for all of his very, very hard work to get this symposium, this conference organized for all of us, and to help us generate some of these conversations. I will admit that I completely rewrote my remarks on the plane last night coming up from Vietnam, because I was there doing a little bit of research, and I completely sort of reshaped what I was thinking about. And so this might be a little rough and ready and raw, but it's pertinent and new. On Saturday night, I was walking down a riverside street in the city of Con Pho in the Mekong Delta in southern Vietnam. The street is closed to traffic on Saturday evening, so local citizens and visitors can meander, peruse the night market, and people watch. So good people watching. This particular Saturday also featured a music performance on Vietnamese instruments by a group of students from FPT University. This technology-focused university has campuses throughout Vietnam and is well known for requiring students, they require students to learn a traditional Vietnamese instrument before they graduate. As I walked by, however, they were not playing a Vietnamese folk tune or traditional music. They were playing a slowed-down rendition of Despacito. A large group had surrounded the students. Cameras were rolling. You can see one in the picture. And everyone seemed to really enjoy themselves. While I also stopped to listen and snap a photo, I noticed that in playing the tune at a slowed down tempo, the students had enough time to incorporate an occasional embellishment found in various forms of traditional music. It was trepidatious, but the ornamentation, kiitula, seemed to emerge naturally, as if they were starting to apply typical improvisatory practice to this tune. The next day I was chatting with a 21-year-old son of a good friend of mine who also happened to be further up the street at the same time. He had also heard Despacito from a distance. I made a flippant comment to him, trying to be more funny than thoughtful, that Despacito was really old at this point. He didn't laugh and simply said, well, it's well known here. He later told me, quote, Vietnamese traditional musicians only play these modern pieces because they are more recognizable by the public. It helps when you are performing with a crowd. Note that he said with a crowd and not to a crowd here. Indeed, the entire thrust of his argument was that performers draw in a crowd and co-create a performance environment with them. This is how one generates appreciation for traditional music, or indeed any Vietnamese music. The ability to take something popular and blend it with a traditional like this, quote, in his words, proves that the performer is creative, end quote. He had put me in my place with this comment, and I really should have known better. The tune is old to my ears, yes, but to these students and the members of the audience, they were taking part in a long-standing musical process integral to Vietnamese music and Vietnamese creativity. They were making it their own. By slowing down the tempo, adding ornamentation, and listening to it together, the tune was becoming Vietnamese. As one of the people who tried to organize this conference, the symposium, I'm here to try to set the stage for the conversation. I want to, in these brief remarks, portray a global history of music not so much as a discipline, but as an exciting forum for a discussion of boundaries. It's the place where scholars meet to discuss where we next turn, to whom we turn, and why, as well as the methods we might use to get us there. We are here to advance a shared approach or approaches to global music history. Whatever we decide today, I think, we decide together. One of the goals of our conversation today is to situate the global history of music vis-a-vis the work of Chen Hanxing, who of course has a strong connection to this university. One of the potential strengths of a global history of music is its ability to explore the intersection between disparate methods. For me, this is ethnography and historiography. First, ethnography. Tina Ramrine advocates for music scholarship to uncover the ways that music and sound have been shaped or mediated by, quote, imperial conquests, trans-imperial aesthetics, labor histories, and overlapping post-colonial practices, end quote. This is taken from a text that she contributed to about global history of music. Music scholars must question old assumptions and interrogate the histories of particular genres, concepts, and ways of playing. Ramrine argues that we live in a moment when, quote, post-colonial subjects across the globe focus on new socio-political relationships and transnational alliances, including Pan-African and global indigenous movements, end quote. Music scholars need to take heed of these alliances and represent them as cutting across the ways that colonial imperial judgments have carved up the globe. So looking at these alliances and looking at how they intersect with imperialization and colonization. But the danger of this kind of work that she describes is that one gets caught up in a moment, in kind of a decolonial moment, and loses sight or loses sonic perception of the very histories that one is attempting to highlight. These alliances that Ramrine describes are not new. They are contemporary iterations of here in a long line of fledgling alliances built in philosophy, politics, and musicianship over the 20th century and of course before. So when decolonization rewrites, replaces, and glosses over the power of post-colonial and anti-colonial moments of the past, decolonization itself becomes impotent and open to easy critique. This is why we also need historiography in addition to ethnography. Professor Jin-Ah Kim argues that a global history of music must involve a, quote, decentralized and multi-perspectival historiography. This kind of work enables a study of, quote, the dynamic of musical processes that take place in assimilation and isolation as well as in entangled asymmetry, end quote. Here there is a focus on musical processes operating across history. Kim encourages us to critically evaluate and expand our historiographic methods, as well as trace flows of musical processes in many directions of travel. Working alongside ethnography in a global history of music, this helps us move closer to a more fulsome evaluation of the messy boundaries between global and local music practice. To help us, we have texts like Chen's Asia as method to serve as effective counterpoint. Importantly, I don't think he gets everything right. And indeed, I can apply the same critique the same critique of Ramrine, I can also make of Chen's text. On his very chapter on decolonization, he advocates for a critical syncretism of subjectivity, where a new totality is built from the synthesis of disparate sources. This is the same work that was described in the 1940s by the group Les Temps Modernes, the Modern Times group. They were based in Paris, but they involved many sort of anti-colonial figures from around the world, including Chen Tao, who's a Vietnamese philosopher. They advocated for a syncretic approach as well. And in Asia as method, Chen kind of describes this, this idea as new, but it's not new. It's been around for a long time. But his text still generates conversation. In it, he advocates for both decolonization and deimperialization. This is the work that is done to rebuild the subject and rebuild the subject's relationship with the world that is no longer bound by colonization, empire consolidation, and Cold War reunification. Now, there are slightly different processes, of course. Decolonization is work that is done on subject formation, undertaken by the formerly colonized, to work through the difficult history of the former colonizer. De-imperialization, which I think is short shrift, is the process of subject formation undertaken by the former colonizer or imperialist and their representatives. So I would say that me, as an American who now carries a British passport, who is white, is a representative of the former colonizer and imperialist. So de-imperialization is the work that I need to be doing in my own work. But this works alongside the decolonial work that happens around the world. Chen encompasses this work within a geocolonial historical materialism, which he defines as the study of the circulation and adoption of ideas and belief systems within the colonized geographies and beyond. That is, he writes, how local history and dialectical interaction with colonial and other historical forces transforms this internal formation on the one hand and articulates the local to world history and the structure of global capital on the other. These interactions with colonized geographies circulate outwards from these localities and influence the larger narratives ultimately reported. So, within this kind of geocolonialism or materialism, we can find a place where ethnography and even autoethnography and historiography can work together. And to start my conclusion, I'll give you an example of what I'm calling imperial listening. And actually, I'm adopting this from someone else, as I'll get to. So most of you know that I do research on Vietnamese music. In addition to attending music conferences like this one, I also contribute to the discipline of Vietnamese studies, which is currently continuing its work to focus more on Vietnam, which sounds kind of antithetical to what Vietnamese studies is. Vietnamese studies in the United States for a long time has been a very Americanized endeavor. But there's this push towards really refocusing on Vietnam and Vietnamese language sources and Vietnamese voices. And so I contributed to a conference that took place in Berkeley earlier this year. But I had a conversation at this conference at the end of it that really bothered me and really perplexed me. One participant, I'm not going to name the person, but it's someone that I know relatively well. It is an American of European ancestry, asked me about my paper, which is this one here. Over the course of the conversation, he ultimately argued with me that the Vietnamese musical style does not exist. This is because you can trace almost everything in Vietnam to somewhere else. It's either from Chinese lands, it's from France, it's from the US. And this includes popular music from the 20th century, because there's a great deal of consumption of French and American music. And this really surprised me. This is a scholar of music who argued that Vietnamese style doesn't exist. This person's argument is based on a form of listening, what Ronald Rodama and Tamula Olenian, call imperial listening. It's a mode of objectifying Vietnamese music and listening from the outside at a distance, where you're not understanding Vietnamese music from the inside or trying to understand that inside. So this person I was speaking to was sort of in critical need of de-imperializing their perspective, removing those kind of old imperial vestiges from their analytical framework and understanding music from the inside. So I've run over my time, so I'm going to conclude. I want to add this performance of Despacito to the history of Vietnamese music. And I want to do that through looking at it ethnographically, quoting these people that I've quoted in this presentation today, and also connecting it to sort of the long history of adoption from outside, but also turning these musics into something different, into something local, and then trying to, again, sort of write this history that is, again, both historiographic and ethnographic. we can then try to understand not only how this tune becomes Vietnamese, but also retains its globality. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Professor Nathapol Musimtima.
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the organizing committee for having me here. I'm sure today is going to be a very, very exciting, and I'm also confident that we all are going to learn so much and generate a lot more questions heading towards the ICTMB Musing of East Asia Conference. For over 2 decades, Huan Xing Chen's Asia's method has and continues to inspire scholars far beyond the area studies towards decolonial practices. I'm quite sure that I'm a relatively new subscriber, if you will, to Asia's method compared to many of you here. Having first encountered Asia's method in 2020 as a part of suggested, not even required, reading for a PhD course on critical Southeast Asian studies, those 3 Ds have stuck with me ever since. As a straight Southeast Asian male, born and raised in Bangkok, Thailand, and trained in American ethnomusicology, Asia's method touched me in somewhat ambivalent ways. While a lot of things speak to me, some other things need more contemporary nuances. Even Chen himself admits that a lot has changed since his groundbreaking book's first release. Yet, the fact that Asia's methods is still going strong, this meeting being the case in point, also indicates how much or little things have changed. As the title of my discussion suggests, I'd like to first recount an ethnographic field experience of my participation in a conference to demonstrate how Asia as method is ethnographically enacted and resisted. After that, I will draw on an article by Peter Jackson and a book co-authored by Syed Farid Alatas and Vinita Sinha to discuss the resonance, albeit an indirect one, with the decolonial spirit set forth by Asia's method. All these are to illustrate the utility and limits of Asia as method from a Southeast Asian perspective. On July 25 to 27, I attended a conference hosted by the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, Southeast Asia Branch, or ISPMC, in Bangkok, Thailand. A general meeting took place on the second day, and one of the agenda items was a review of the ISPMC statutes or bylaws. When the executive committee showed the organization's mission and statement, which read, quote, ISPMC hopes to de-center the study of popular music and culture from the West, end quote. Things got a little intense with the word de-center. Some participants, including me, were satisfied with the inclusion of the word. Of course, it indicates the organization's firm position to push the horizon of its scholarship beyond the confines of the region's geopolitics and colonial history. Other participants, however, not so much. They thought that the word was unnecessary as it harkened back to the endless center-periphery binary, and that the organization would be better off focusing on identity formation and the music itself. I should also note that each side of the split opinion consisted of equally diverse scholars from Southeast Asia, East Asia, the Americas, and Europe. After some escalated exchanges of ideas, the executive committee decided to let the term stand because it reflects the ISPMC consciousness to politicize music studies. Well, the next eyebrow-raising moment came on the last day when it was announced that the next conference in 2025 will take place in Taiwan, subject to the confirmation of the host institution. In Asia as method, Chen has noted that countries in Southeast Asia's relation with their former colonizers have not yet been properly addressed, nor have the former imperial powers done enough to acknowledge the harm they did. Chen has got a point, but things have changed quite a lot. The Decolonizing Southeast Asian Sound Archives, or the DECOSEAS, is worth noting here. This transnational research project is evident that the region and its former colonies are progressing towards decolonial, not decolonizing practice. Likewise, the ISPMC's mission to decenter serves as a poignant reminder of the organization's reflexivity and self-determination. Such assertions of agency are important because Southeast Asia is often portrayed, at least in Chen's book, as a victim of the southward advanced discourse in Asia's method. So if we are to extend Asia's method southward, actually, I suggest that it must be situated in the region's context. In the post-World War II Southeast Asia, imperialist desires may not be as apparent compared to their East Asian counterparts. Rather, it is the ambiguous allures of the West, being at once a threat and an inspiration, that structure the release/production of knowledge, which in turn demonstrate a different form of unmarked universality and centrality of the West. Decentering does not simply mean refusal or constant criticism of the Western musical influence. Doing so would be problematic, especially in the field of popular music studies. Rather, decentering asks us to, according to Chen, quote, bring out the complexity of power relations within the world spaces, end quote. If decentering holds that much promise, why was it contested in the meeting I just mentioned? I would argue that thinking about identity and the music itself is indeed valid, but it is not just enough. If Southeast Asians study popular music studies are to have a meaningful and critical contribution, it must be realized in conjunction with the history of colonialism and imperialism as experienced from the region. Without these trajectories, we cannot properly map the formation and conditions of globalization, which is the bedrock of popular music. to begin with. The decentering spirit of Southeast Asian popular music studies is the first step to charting a new scholarly inquiry beyond the canon of Eurocentric popular music studies. This could eventually lead to alternative popular music studies of not just Southeast Asia and East Asia, but of Asia as a whole. Drawing on the sociologists Syed Anatas and Vinita Sinha, alternative popular music studies of Asia are informed by local and regional historical experiences and cultural practices without being discursively dominated by another, that is, Western tradition. As in Asia's method, being alternative requires a turn to philosophies, epistemologies, histories, and the arts, other than those of the Western tradition, sometimes even outside of our very own preconceived geocultural boundaries. This brings me to my second point here. The next ISFC conference is to be hosted in Taiwan. To be fair, there are several papers in the conference that deal with East Asian popular music, most of which have little to do with Southeast Asia. Can the decision reflect Taiwan's triumph in its imperialist southward advanced discourse? Has Asia as a method failed? Well, I don't think so. On the contrary, the move takes the historical turn and the inner referencing of Asia even a step further by troubling the notions of area studies. According to Thai studies scholar Peter Jackson, spatially informed approaches to knowledge in area studies are often criticized for being an outdated form of knowledge in pre-globalization era defined by the geopolitics of the nation states. However, Jackson also notes that deglobalizing processes are also producing new spatialities of difference. Spatiality has not been erased, but rather has been reformulated in the context of globalization. Hosting the ISFC in Taiwan, in my humble opinion, is a nod not only to the much needed inter-Asia referencing, it also signals toward comparative area studies that attend to the, quote, dramatic changes in global knowledge production that are underway as a result of the geopolitical repositioning of Euro-America following the rise of East, Southeast, and South Asia polities and academies. To fully capitalize Chen's Asia's method in global turn of music study, attention to colonial, Cold War, and imperialist history alone is no longer sufficient today, if I may. While it's crucial that we are cognizant of the globalization's genealogy, it is equally productive that we anticipate how we, as music scholars of Asia, can reposition ourselves with respect to the slippages and ruptures of power relation in the highly disruptive 21st century. The path towards the global turn in music studies, at least from a Southeast Asian perspective, is one that rides on the waves of neoliberal globalization rather than simply historicizing and problematizing it. It is the path that takes the re-spatialized regimes of knowledge to heart, but remains open to respectful and empathetic cross and trans-regional dialectic. That's it for my presentation. Thank you.
We also like to welcome Professor Kwan Yuen Yu from the University of Hawaii.
Hi. Can everyone hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I will start. First, I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Shen and Dr. Cannon for hosting and organizing this symposium, and also to Tsinghua University for providing the venue. I also like to offer a special thank you to Yiren and Xianyu for arranging this virtual platform, which enables me to share my thoughts on global terms of music study in S4 Asia, from the middle of the Pacific. and specifically from the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Being located in the Pacific while utilizing the internet as a means of travel and exchange reflects the central ideas I will explore in my presentation titled Pacific as a Method Repositioning Asian Music from Islandscape. This approach is informed by Pacific scholarship, which conceptualizes the ocean as a unifying force, connecting a sea of islands rather than a mere physical barrier or navigational space. Pacific anthropologists such as Anthony Hauofa have argued that 19th century imperialism imposed artificial boundaries on Pacific Islanders, transforming a once expansive and interconnected world into isolated, small, and impoverished island states, a perception that continues to persist today. Moving beyond a Eurocentric and imperial focus, Pacific historians like Greg Denning and David Hanlon engage deeply with localized indigenous perspectives and long-standing oceanic traditions by proposing the concept of deep time, a historical consciousness that transcends colonial intervention as a dividing point of history. Instead of segmenting the past into prehistory and history based on the contact, they emphasize the continuous circulation of change, adaptation, and resilience that spans temporal and spatial boundaries. As Hanlon argues, quote, the decolonization of history requires an appreciation of all of the different ways in which a consciousness of the past can be expressed. History can be sung, danced, chanted, spoken, carved, woven, painted, sculpted, and read, as well as written, unquote. This perspective calls for a broader approach that integrates indigenous historiographies, oral tradition, and expressive arts such as music and dance into deeper engagement with local cultural practices. In contemporary Pacific studies, these art forms have been carefully studied, revised, and articulated, becoming integral to the tightly woven fabric of Pacific epistemology. How can we, as scholars studying music within the geographical space now perceived as Asia, integrate Pacific epistemology into our studies? In ways of knowing, a seascape epistemology, Karen Amimoto Ingersoll suggests that embracing an oceanic way of knowing requires moving beyond land-based, Western-centric intellectual framework. This shift challenges the conventional notion of state as bounded territories defined by land control, where the ocean is perceived as a treacherous border and island smallness is measured solely by land mass, marginalizing the islanders as people of tiny isolated islands. When applied to music study, this approach encourages us to transcend land-based perspectives and foreground the migratory nature and inherent fluidity of sound production, understanding it as a series of interconnected historical, geographical, and embodied narratives. Second, drawing from the concept of ways of knowing, Cristiano and Frederick Lau advocates for an ocean-focused ethnomusicology of waves that prioritizes dynamic process over static structure. This approach emphasizes movement, circulation, and flow as central analytical themes, understanding music as a series of encounters like ocean waves that continuously evolve, transform, and generate expansive ripple effects. It foregrounds the ongoing flux and adaptability of musical creation and reception, which are rooted in localized knowledge systems and soundscape, often extending beyond their initial intentions. By focusing on the relationality of musical sounds, this perspective mirrors ocean's ever-changing nature, highlighting the generative possibility inherent in this fluid and adaptive framework. Third, Pacific scholarship moved beyond the binary of continent-centric versus ocean-centric perspectives by advocating for the integration through an island-based approach, where the ocean is seen as an extension of the land. By invoking the concept of islandscape, we recognize the fluidity of the ocean as part of the island's temporal and spatial dimensions. Dylan Mannon's concept of the paracolonial further enables the exploration of multiple temporalities and spatiality that coexist with colonialism, both preceding and surpassing it. This perspective challenges the rigid segmentation of history that is pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial, and foster a deeper understanding of how colonialism and other hegemonic forces interact with diverse ways of knowing across time and space. This approach enables us to articulate islandscape as dynamic centers of connectivity rather than as isolated peripheries. With these 3 points in mind, the following briefly introduce 2 case studies that exemplify the integration of Pacific epistemology into music study. The first case centers on a group of Amis and indigenous people of Taiwan who in 2019 expressed solidarity with native Hawaiians by posting a video on Facebook supporting their protest against the construction of an astronomical telescope on the sacred Hawaiian mountain, Mauna Kea. The Amis conveyed their support through a performance of 2 Hawaiian songs, which later became one of the Hawaiian movement's favorites. Although shared via a virtual platform, this act of musical solidarity transcends historical connection to American colonialism in Hawaii. It reflects a translation of indigenous resistance within Taiwan's ongoing territorial dispute under ROC settler nationalism, which also faces the constant threat of potential invasion by the PRC. Moreover, the Amis performance goes beyond mere imitation, incorporating kinetic movements and vocal expressions deeply rooted in indigenous sensibilities. This fostered an intercultural dialogue through music while maintaining a profound connection to their ancestral land. Consequently, this act of intercultural musicking, shaped both by Taiwanese and Hawaiian colonial realities, asserts a form of sonic sovereignty that challenges East Asian centrality, revitalizes sonic practice, and reshaping musical aesthetics. Here, the lived experience of being indigenous in Taiwan converges with broader struggles for land, sovereignty, and cultural survival shared across the Pacific, reinforcing the deep interconnectedness between these indigenous communities. The second case revolves around the experience of being Asian in the Pacific. Michael Philippine is a kulu hula or hula master of Halau Hula Kanueau, or the Hula School of Art. In contemporary Hawaii, Halau serves as a cultural center and a community of performing artists dedicated to perpetuating various Hawaiian art forms, including instrument making, lei weaving, hula dance, and genealogical knowledge connected to the islands. Payne began studying hula at the age of 10 under the guidance of the renowned Mikey Ayu Lake, whose hula genealogies traces back 6 generations. However, Payne is not native Hawaiian. His family migrated from Canton to Hawaii in the mid-19th century during the first major wave of immigration driven by the demand for labor on sugar plantations. These immigrants primarily came from South China, Japan, and the Philippines, with many becoming naturalized citizens of the Hawaiian Kingdom, which had declared its independence in 1843. Some of these migrant workers later became supporters of Hawaiian sovereignty after the U.S. illegally overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. Today, many descendants of these diasporic communities do not identify themselves as Asian American, but as citizens of Hawaiian Kingdom. When asked about the relationship between his ethnicity and musical creativity, Payne stated, quote, "You are inspired by your surroundings. Growing up, you have Chinese, Japanese, and Hawaiian and others around you, naturally, you find the most appropriate way to connect to the land. To me, Taoist ritual and Hawaiian practice share a lot of similarities. Unquote. In addition to his dedication to Hawaiian performing art, Kane is also a big fan of Mandel Pop, with Hong Kong rapper Jackson Wang and Taiwanese indigenous singer Aline among his favorite artists. In this case, the lived experience of being Chinese in Hawaii intertwined with indigenously led decolonial practices through the perpetuation of Hawaiian performing arts. Payne's practice reflects a broader Pacific experience, one that transcends rigid ethnic boundaries while forging connections that honor both ancestral roots and the land on which he lives. In closing, I'd like to invoke Pacific historian Greg Denning's statement on writing history as a performative act. He states, quote, "Things of the past come into the present as cargo across the beaches of island cultures. The encapsulated meaning are transformed in the new environment of the present into other meanings. The history of things will have to unfold the meaning of the present in which they were made and all the meanings of their successive present. The history in places, especially in places of cross-cultural encounters, will take as much imagination as science to see. History will have to be a little more artful than being a non-fiction. It will have to have a sense of the continuities of living through different times, despite all the transformation and translation that masquerade as discontinuities." Unquote. This statement reminds us that history is not static but fluid, constantly transforming as it flows through different temporalities and spaces. In the same way, our understanding of music and culture must adopt this fluidity, recognizing that the past and present are in ongoing conversation, with music continuously evolving through lived experience and boundary-crossing interactions. By embracing Pacific as a method, we adopt an oceanic sensibility that challenges rigid, land-based imaginations and encourages us to reimagine history and culture as interconnected, dynamic, and adaptable, like the ocean itself. I urge colleagues in music study to embody this Pacific approach, where time and space are understood as a fluid continuum, engaging with the ocean's vast networks of connection, acknowledging the movements of waves as sites of exchange, and honoring the people who navigate its surface while diving into the depth of their deep time. Thank you.
Next, we also welcome Professor Tasao Wu Shun from Academia Sinica.
Let me first thank the organizers and Tsinghua University for organizing such a wonderful event so that everybody can get together and talk about different things. Okay. The same as Alex. Last night I rewrote my script. The reason for that is I had the same question. How does the music sound Syro-Burmese? Because that is what I have been dealing with. And then I realized I was trapped with all these multi-sided and diverse nexus of spatial and temporal, like a congestions. So that's why I decided to rewrite. So this is what I'm going to present today. I hope that all makes sense.
We turn the sound back up.
Can you hear me? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. What does it mean to belong to a culture in constant motion? The culture is particularly shaped by ongoing ties of migration, interconnected translocal and transnational ties, and shifting cultural governance. In an increasingly complex world defined by transnationalism, the voices of those navigating the intricate path of the diaspora are more critical than ever. Those voices symbolize resilience and agency, showcasing the diversity of immigrant subjectivities. They reflect how individuals and groups actively express their ambivalent identities within a continuously evolving social and political landscape. So I'm giving you an example here. The song Fearless, released on Facebook shortly after the Myanmar coup in February 2021, exemplifies this journey. Duan, the songwriter and singer, identifies as part of Myanmar Generation Z and has experienced strong social-cultural ambivalence, particularly reflected in his upbringing along the Sino-Myanmar border, what we call the Golden Triangle region. His musical talent flourished during his college years in Taiwan, where he embraced hip-hop as a medium for expressing his complex identities and activist views.
毛三十五去做白客，我一次你妈变今天的收益。只要民主派不能承受，他妈的手拿走就拿走。这是西亚之后，你可以看到你要说走说那，学生那么标准的向我唱。3月3号发生的事，先不管你要回来，你看造反，爱恋不会让牺牲，我们一起会有声音抗争。
The song prominently showcases this ambivalence by primarily singing in Vietnamese dialect. Duan aligns himself with the Vietnamese Generation Z while incorporating Burmese and English into provocative lyrics that criticize both the Myanmar military government and the older Sino-Myanmar generations. My analysis of this song connects often overlooked elements of indigenous colonialism, translocal networks, and the Cold War dynamics, offering new insights into the multicultural intersections within Asia. But today, because of the time limit, I cannot really elaborate on this. But as what you heard earlier, the song expressed clearly his sense of ambivalence by using different dialects, and also each dialect is embedded into the geopolitics and also imperial forces in that region, which we call it Golden Triangle region, that has been overlooked for the centuries. So from this case, I propose 3 significant ideas. The first is borderland as metaphor. Like the concepts of in-betweenness and ambivalence, terms such as hybridity, double as consciousness, and migration, along with metaphors like margins, borders, and also like border crossing, are closely linked to the conceptualization of identity, race, and ethnicity. By engaging with the musical diasporas in Taiwan, my study challenges conventional narratives and redefined Asia as method as older than as method. I use the idea of older than to foreground the flows within it, revealing humanity's creative potentials in embracing in-betweenness as a form of social agency. As a metaphor, older than represents an interstitial space where music making and other cultural practices navigate categories defined by genres, ethnicity, geographies, and national boundaries. This space also serves as a site where informal cultural ties and contradictory social interactions emerge. The complexities of life experiences situated in this in-between realm highlight the ongoing negotiations shaped by multiple agencies of connectivity. Second is multiple subjectivities. The concept of multiple subjectivities is also crucial for understanding how individuals and communities within diasporas reshape their identities, especially in the context of globalization and multiculturalism. As immigrants navigate experiences across various cultures and social environments, they often embody a range of identities that reflect their complex backgrounds. This fluidity enables them to establish their positions within a constantly changing social landscape. In this context, multiple subjectivities highlight the diverse ways of diasporic communities articulate their histories and negotiate their identities in relation to both their homeland, their home countries, and the new environments, which is the host countries. It reveals the rich cultural expressions that arise from these interactions, emphasizing that identity is not static but continuously evolving. This concept is significant for analyzing the intricacies of immigrant experiences and the multifaceted nature of cultural identities within a broader framework of transnational dynamics. So who's Asia? The musicians in my study never see themselves as part of Asia, and their musical practices are not confined to this region. In my view, Asia is a new construct reimagined by academia or by the academicians here. In recent years, academic communities focused on music research have flourished across East Asia, Southeast Asia, and inter-Asian contexts. These groups significantly contribute to a more integrated musicology, covering sub-disciplines such as historical musicology, ethnomusicology, cultural studies on music, and the sociology of music, etc. The landscape reflects the translocal influences shaping musical histories through diverse scholarly interests. So organizations like ICT and MIA, IMSIA, ISPON, and ISPOSIA exemplify the interplay of research outcomes in East Asian music studies and Southeast Asian public music studies. The work of scholars with various backgrounds enriched these courses and highlights the region's complexities. Exploring the interactive networks within Asian musicology underscores the need to preserve local cultural contexts and diverse academic traditions, mitigating the hegemonic structures in cultural geography knowledge and fostering equitable representation. In conclusion, the evolution of Asian musicology, if we really have one, demonstrates its adaptability to global trends while maintaining distinct cultural voices. This academic community established a cohesive framework for Asian musicology. By validating each other's findings, these collaborative efforts offered valuable insights into cultural exchanges and identity, ultimately contributing to a deeper understanding of Asia's complex music heritage in an ever-changing world. Thank you.
Thank you all to all our presenters and speakers for their insightful contributions. Before we conclude the first session, we would also invite back our presenters to the front of the stage to have a discussion. Any questions can be asked at this point. Please feel free to express your opinions and concluding thoughts.
Other questions?
It's not a question as much as a wonder. Thank you very much for all that presentation. You were really great. Sorry, I forgot your name, the first presenter. Alex. Thank you very much for that. I've just been doing some lectures and workshops in China and in Korea. And in China, I ran into a scholar at the university who challenged everything that I was doing. I was teaching improvisation on Chinese instruments to the students. And he challenged a lot of my thoughts because he's a classically trained musician in the Western style. And I thought much of what we were talking about, it always felt like to me that this was kind of a cultural Stockholm syndrome. And that the concepts of de-imperializing I take to heart. I think that's really important. The term decolonialism for me doesn't seem to go far enough when we're suffering from kind of like Stockholm syndrome. And he fought harder than any Western scholar I've ever run into. And he's Chinese and studying in Europe. So I wonder if you have any concept. It seems that there needs to be almost another model, or another word or another concept for how you take that away from yourself when you're so steeped in Western culture, but you're Asian. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think what you're describing actually aligns very well with some of the themes of the panel, which I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists, but I think perhaps I was sticking a bit, I was staying quite close to Chen Hongqing's Asianist method, whereas my other panelists were clearly moving away from it. And so I think what you are describing potentially falls into that camp, where it's you're suggesting, okay, these concepts that he's using are interesting, but they're not capturing the circulation, the fluidity, the complexity of what we find within I'll just say the continent of Asia. The second paper, Puff's paper, talked about, this from the Southeast Asian standpoint, but even from within East Asia, we are moving away from this. And maybe, if we're going to stick with the language of decolonization, de-imperialization, de-Cold War, then we need to apply these concepts more widely rather than within specific geographical areas. I don't have a term at hand to suggest or to apply to this example that you have offered, but I would say that, and perhaps you would agree that this is not new by any means. I'm thinking about periods of Vietnamese Vietnamese history, where there were fierce battles, even physical battles over, what model do we follow? Whether it's the Western model, whether it's a Japanese model, or whether it's a French model or a Vietnamese model. And there were all of those categories were represented by Vietnamese nationals advocating ardently for that particular perspective. But they were, they were working towards a particular goal, which in the Vietnamese case was, how do we make things better for the Vietnamese people themselves? What model do they use? And actually, if I can, quickly turn back to you and ask, do you see any alignment between what you were teaching and what he was advocating? Were you working towards the same goal, or were there different goals?
The goal obviously was the education of the students for the future, so yes, in that. He actually finally came around because he was advocating how it was important to play Western classical music, tunes that everybody recognizes because this keeps orchestras alive. And my final comment to him, or what changed him, was I'm saying, well, orchestras are not doing well in the West. And if we're really talking about, keeping the music alive, Taylor Swift was far more successful than any orchestra in North America. And that changed his concept and thought, okay, this is not about keeping something alive economically. So at that point, then we could agree and move together. So thank you, Taylor Swift. First time I ever said that.
My name is Yang Jian from National Thailand University. Thank you all for the wonderful papers. I have two questions. A short one for Alex. You mentioned in your paper there is something called the Dong Morgan in Vietnam, and I was wondering whether it's something that's the conversation only between the Vietnamese and the colonial sort of colonizers, or was it involved with maybe different countries? Okay, this is one short question, and the second question is a general one, which will probably come up again and again in this symposium, which is okay, so we have been doing research, we have been doing scholarships in dealing with different cultures and musics. And what exactly is the difference when we apply to the concept of the so-called global term of musicology? What exactly is the difference, methodologically or whatever? Maybe some of you can have a short summary. Yeah, because the thing you were talking about, I can imagine that would occur, before people talk about the so-called global term of musicology in an ethnomusicological context.
I'll answer the first question to start. So they told that was a group that was initially started by Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir in Paris, and they were aiming to publish voices of the colonized. So they published Trần Đức Thao in Vietnamese, who came out of the Vietnamese context. They published Fanon, Frantz Fanon. So it's the second category. These were Vietnamese, Algerian, Tunisian, and other sort of colonized people.
Within the empire.
Yes, within the empire, they're all publishing in French, but they were trying to disseminate this as widely as they possibly could. Were many Vietnamese reading this? Some were, yes. The magazine that they published was shipped to, I know it was shipped to Hanoi through at least the 1960s, so during the war it was still making its way. And if you could read French and you had access to the library, you could go and read this.
I would like to add to your second question that you mentioned about what exactly is the difference, right? When we talk about global term in musicology. One of the things that I think comes to mind when we talk about global term is that we take musicology itself and question it, right? If we are really taking that term, is musicology still valid as a point of reference? Do we have to deconstruct, take it apart, and reimagine what musicology is again? Because as we all know, here all music is not universal language. Music is not usually intelligible, right? For example, building on Alex's comments about the attempt of the former colonial power to present the voices of the colonized, quote unquote, we can also begin to think about what sort of, and this, I'm speaking of this in terms of decoloniality approach, where we sort of think about, hey, what sort of frame of knowledge production are the voices of the colonized speaking from? I'm giving you an example from Thailand, right? We talk about, hey, what is it about musicology, about ethnomusicology, about what does it mean to study Thai traditional music, so to speak, right? And then one of the criticism that comes up many times is that Thai musicology is trying very hard to legitimize themselves as a proper music with a proper sound, with measurable, with all this concrete theory that is similar to the Western music, right? This thing has not gone away, this thing has not moved away. So maybe it might be useful, maybe for us to think about what it means to really take a global turn to musicology. Like if we do take global turn to musicology, what shape or form of musicology would be like? Would it be totally different? Would it be totally collapsed? Would it be totally something new, something that's worth thinking about? Yeah.
Can I say something? Can you hear me? Okay, I want to add on that. I'm interested in this notion of reception because when we talk about global term, whose term? First of all, I think that the idea of term it's a little it doesn't reflect the way I'm trying to think of this is a gradual, fluid moment when everyone is gradually turning. So if you just talk about a turn, it's sort of like a sudden turn. But my understanding is this turn is a gradual, sometimes it's unnoticeable. Just like the edges of things is gradually eroding, but you don't always notice. One. And then secondly, I'm thinking about this idea of turn. It can be a sense of internal reception of sounds. For example, when I hear Mozart, my understanding and someone from the other side of the globe will have a different understanding, and that itself is an understanding of a term, right? Because I can have an approach that think of the same sound, then I interpret the sound as a different inspiration based on my own lived experience. Then my production based on the same sound will have a different ripple effect, and that production already is a term. So that's what I want to add on, is that this reception of the same sound can have different ripple effect, and this is technically is already a term. Because, like I said, like ocean wave, when you hit something and then the wave comes back, that itself is already a term. Okay, so that's why I want to talk about this idea of Pacific as a method. Is that if we think about ocean and waves, sound is like waves, right? When you hit something, it comes back. And then sometimes the wave is not strong enough and it's dissipating in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes it's strong enough and it becomes this engulfing wave, then it becomes a colonizing wave and then, tsunami and destroy everything. Right? So if we think of term, there's different ways to interpret a term, but then if we want to come up with a rigid definition of what exactly is a term, then it's not what I'm trying to argue here. Yeah. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Last year, when we started to think about and started to construct more like, so what is Asian musicology? Or what is the global term of musicology? So last year, we actually had some kinds of questions similar to what we are asking today. At the time, I was thinking a lot of the colonial or the century endeavors have been brought up decades ago by ethnomusicologists. So now, what is different? So when we are talking about term, the global term, and at the time I was more pessimistic. I'm thinking of, okay, so this is not going to go anywhere. But this year, actually, I have turned my head around, and I feel like, no, this is why we are here now. So previously, probably not so many, like a different subdisciplinary endeavors occurred like what we are doing today. So previously, ethnomusicology and historical musicology or sociology of music, especially in Taiwan, we also have like in Thailand, we have the traditional way of they try to legitimize the way that how they do opera, Chinese opera, and how they integrate it in their own way. But since we have been taking the reflexive term throughout from last year to this year, or probably we are going to ask the same thing again in the future. But I think for me, at least, I feel that Asia is not one. Asia is multiple. And perspectives also. We have different perspectives from, like me, I have my own positionality as Odalam. That's because my subject of study is immigrants and migrant workers. And then, because so we create this symposium, we create this space that everybody come together, so we can try to construct an integrated approach that how we do immigrant music studies from a historical musicological way, and probably different from me, but we come together and try to construct like encompassing or different views towards the same study, the same subject of study. So Another thing I want to point out is the double consciousness. For me, it's always really in my mind is that why do we call ourselves as Asian or Taiwanese or Thai people? Because we are always having the perspectives from others. So Asia is within Asia. Asian is within Asians. The double consciousness inspired me a lot because now we are trying to decolonizing and recentering. That's because we have what we call the hegemonic, the Western or the European knowledge, the norms there. That's why we are now trying to see how they see us and how we can stand up from our stance and try to move forward and try to break the norms which the others have been giving us. So I think that is the values of the global term today.
These comments deserve a round of applause. I like how turn is being interpreted in several different ways here. And I think that in itself is a kind of turn, and it's generative. For me, turns can be embodied. When I think of turn, I immediately think of the body turning, and embodiment, and what is meant by gesture, and how gesture intersects with sound, and what that can mean. I really like this comment I was making about the ripple effects of the turn, observing what happens when one turns, how those ripples impact others. I also think about this phenomenologically in terms of orientation when you turn and reorient and you look at someone else, or you orient your ears in a particular way. I mean, we're all music consumers and specialists in this room, and we know that depending on where you are, sounds are mixing together in slightly different ways. So when you turn your ears or you move within a room, you hear sound differently, and that can generate new kinds of meanings. So I think we are trying to broaden and strengthen the way that we are turning, turn towards, turn back, observe the ripple effects of, in order to try to broaden understandings of the important roles that music plays in the constitution of identity in the world.
Do we have any more questions?
I'm Darryl from the National Tsinghua University. To that question, what the difference exactly is between what the scholars have done and what we are doing now. I have a lot to say, and I can show you one example to say what has changed. I remember that Bruno Netto in the early 1980s, he described the Western music or the Western culture and Western technology for the world, let's say, not Western world, described that as an innovation at that time. But in 2017, the same person, Bruno Netto, he wrote an article titled, "Have you changed your mind? Have you changed your mind?" He mentioned, he argues that in this article, said that for him, he said that now he believed that the ways people change their music during the process of westernization, the modernization, this have led him to believe that for understanding the music of the world, comprehending the phenomenon of change was central. It's a huge difference. Before that, he kind of rejected invasion of the West. But now he started to believe that it's the phenomenon, that's the reality, it's the world we are living in. We should accept that what has changed. So he started to talk about that. Even we as musicologists should also do historical research. Not only watch people do at the museum, we should also do research like historians do to value what had changed and accept the fact, not always to criticize that that's just the invasion. So that's one example I want to add to that question raised by Yang Jianteng and by the Blue Nettle, his own words. I think there's a 40 years gap between the two sayings.
Can I respond to that? Okay. Thank you, Gil, for the question. This is exactly, I think, Bruno Nettle, his changing statement exemplify what we're talking about is this ever-evolving notion of what we can think of musical production. If we think of, then this is actually the reason why I like Menon's idea of para-colonial, is that you don't see a rigid definition of, okay, what is pre-colonial, what's colonial, what's post-colonial, but we think of this expensive lived experience that colonialism being part of it. So if you think of colonialism being part of it, that you think of indigenous or your personal lived experience as preceding but also surpassing colonialism, you're working against but also working along colonialism. So that's the idea of being fluid, is that you don't succumb to one specific definition, but you can be strategically but also practically identified with different notions of music production, different ways of thinking about worlding. I mean, we're talking about ontological terms, right? So if we're thinking about different ontology coexisting at the same time, then this switching of different idea, different positionality seems like a natural process to me. Yeah, that's my response to Bruno Nettle's changing position. Yeah.
I wonder if I can ask a question of my fellow panelists. In thinking about these shifts and these changes, I think most of you on the panel have done work across generations. So you spoke specifically about Gen Z. And I mean, as I'm getting older, I'm now starting to feel these really feel generational divides in ways that I did not feel 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And there's this, in my head, it's like, well, do I try to be hip and cool and adopt what they do and try to understand what they do, or do I, sort of maintain that critical distance or whatever it is? That point aside, what sorts of generational differences are you currently seeing, and how do we deal with those within this sort of global turn? Do they have a place within it, and what is that place?
I think I'm going to answer this question in another way. Last night, as I talked about, I was trying to rewrite. And those ones which I left behind and did not present today is actually what the ask is asking. because it's too complex. And for me, my study is my study is a multi-site studies along the whole Asia Pacific region, different sites of Sino Burmese, their music. And from the late 19th century until today. And it took me 24 years. And I'm completing a book right now. I'm not going to publicize, but I'm just trying to say, because of that massive project I've been dealing with, I realized the generational divide is huge. And it's not just one place. Even same generation, the Generation Z and Generation Y, they will try to separate themselves from others and just to make their own stance and trying to make their own identity. And why? Why is that? Because they are in different position in the flows of the site. You might encounter different geopolitics, different imperial politics, cultural politics, gender politics. And I realized that in order to understand clearly the generational divides and in a bigger picture, I still have to go deeper into one place. And from that place, historically and also ethnographically, I have to spend a lot of time. So, to answer your question, is that I never feel like I'm out. And the reason for that is you are evolving with the people. Your thoughts are evolving along with them, and from side to side, in my case, I try to understand. So I try to be with them. So I think it's quite another way where I can understand each other. So to answer your question, it's from side to side, and the generational divides and alliance between different sides always comes up when historical moments, which is memorable, happens. That's what my experience.
Do we have any response from?
Joseph Lane, as someone would say.
If not, then I'll jump in.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Joseph Lane.
Okay, so
Okay,
I
Joseph
have to
raised his
change
hand.
position, that's why. I'm also constantly changing position. Okay, so I mean, to answer the idea of do I feel a generational gap, I don't think I can answer that question now, because like Tassal, I think I'm always interacting and then also changing with different type of people, and then I think maybe I'm blind by this idea because I'm changing, so I don't feel the gap, or because there's a different perspective of the way I'm being perceived, that I don't think I'm changing, but people think I don't think I'm changing, but people think I changed, right? So this generational gap, since I don't think I'm reflective enough to say, oh, there's a gap or not. Yeah, so that's my response to that.
So that Joseph Lane has something to say. Let's have him.
Yeah, I would like to say something. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you for all these papers and questions. It's really fascinating. So there are too many things to ask. but I would like to focus on one question is, with all these big ideas of global term positionalities, and I did not hear that much about how this global term concept has affected our way of studying music, however you define it. So with all the changing of positionality, it sounds like we are still listening to the music in a contemporary and very westernized way. So can we nuance that a little bit? How do you listen to sound from an island way, or from a Thai way, or from a Burmese way, or from a Vietnamese way, or Chinese way, or colonialized way? So can we nuance that a little bit more? Anyone wants to say that? Because Alex said, please would say that you listen to the music that these people performing, you implies something that the musicians were using a Western tune but adding Vietnamese ornamentations there. That to me is a very structural way of listening and analyzing music. And if I can teach you, it sounds also very Western. So do the Vietnamese musicians think that way, use the sounds that way? So those are the questions I would like us to discuss a little bit, or have someone try to answer and explain to me things how.
Okay.
That's it.
Do we have enough time for a quick response?
We have only maybe 3 minutes time before I have to move on to the restaurant.
Okay, okay, I'll make it quick. Let me just offer one personal experience that I've had while dealing with studying on Thai traditional music. One of the things that sort of dominates the literature in Thai music is that Thai music is the tuning system is equidistant. It's like 171.4 seconds between one pitch and another. But it turns out that the practical tuning itself does not very much align with the theory written in the paper. So what happens is that, you're sort of trying to bend the facts so that it fits the theory. And where does that theory comes from? From that modern, quantizable way of measuring sound of music, which is decidedly from the West, right? This is one of the battle that I'm trying to do, is that we change how we listen, and not just how we listen, but how we think about how we listen to music. But has this been successful? I would say not so much, because we're now talking about structure of knowledge. It is so deeply entrenched, not only with the Western system, but also with the neoliberalization system of university right now, where everything is measured with KPI, everyone has to publish in, Scopus with Web of Science and such. So, well, I'm sure that many of us here are trying to do similar things here, but it's quite an uphill battle considering the state of the knowledge and the structure of the institution we are in. Thank you.
So, if I could just quickly respond to Joseph's comment. I want to say first that Joseph was my doctoral supervisor, so every time he asks me a question, I feel like I'm back in my dissertation. Even though I have a professorship now, that will never go away. So I think actually you're right, Joseph, that I was trying to depict my own process. And as much as I can try to study and understand Vietnamese music, some of those natural reactions that I have do come out of a Western framework. But my way of listening will sort of change over time, and as I process and as I think about and as I continue to listen to a particular piece of music, I will continue to question myself, and my interpretation will evolve out of sort of that Western or sort of structuralist way. And the point though that I wanted to try to make in my commentary is that there was my position out in listening to a group of Vietnamese instruments playing Despacito, and then there were others there who were genuinely excited. They were moving along. They were listening with their bodies, and they may not be able to speak about Vietnamese music per se, but they genuinely felt it. And for these students playing, they're not thinking or listening or playing in the same way that I would. They are, adding things to the performance. I'm using the word add, but they are doing this naturally. They are listening to the sound, they are feeling the space, and when they feel comfortable, they are incorporating these elements of their own lived experience and their own new understanding of traditional music into the performance itself. So it's not like they're thinking, well, now I can add this particular ornament. They're just doing it. And that's what's making the performance so exciting and so creative.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, and we can talk more about it. Yeah.
Can I add just one comment or response to Joseph's question? Is that I don't think we can truly detach from the Western listening at this point, because even with the definition of Vietnam, island, everything has changed over time. So and then everything has a little, if I may use this oceanic metaphors, everything has been wet by this Western notion, right? It's a little damp, if you think of it as a sponge. So it's absorbed that wetness from the Western notion of listening, and then can you really squeeze the whole wetness out of the sponge, and then as the idea of West keep evolving, the idea of the idea of Asia keeps evolving, and then what is that? That's a Vietnamese way of listening, or a Thai way of listening, or island way of listening. I think that's everything is sort of relational at this point. Even within, I believe even within Vietnam, when you try to listen, you use a contemporary ear to interpret an older time or to imagine the older time of what Vietnam would be, and even that's relational. So this idea of contemporary listening, it transcends the speciality and temporality. Is what I mean is this, this relational ways of interreferencing is that island state I'm talking about. Is this interconnected of different space and time. That's what I'm trying to stress here. So I think it's a little difficult to detach from the West notion at this point.
Yeah, but I'm not picking you up. I'm just saying that because of that, because we are now talking about so many multiple subjectivities and changes, so it's beautiful as an idea and very inspirational. But then there's an irony of that. No matter how you think or shift, there's always a reference to a point. So that is kind of contradicting ourselves. So we're trying to get our cake and eat it both ways. So as a methodology, I just think that how do we get out of that dilemma? So you keep saying about the island and making it so forth thing, but then at the bottom of your metaphor, there is an island. So can we just talk about the ocean without the island? And that is totally fluid between Asia and the West. So I'm just very interested in this methodological and really theoretical dilemmas. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to end this discussion for now. Unfortunately, we have to end this discussion for now. Now, because it is time for lunch and our workshop session. So we first invite our esteemed speakers and presenters to have lunch in Wayflight Restaurant, which is just to our left-hand side, which is to your right-hand side. And during this time, we will discuss Chapter 5, Asia as Method, Overcoming the Present Conditions of Knowledge Production, from the book of Asia as Method, produced in the year of 2010 by Professor Chen Kuan-Shin. We will direct you later to Wayflight Restaurant, which is right next to us, and we hope you may enjoy your meal. As for the rest of the participants, we also welcome you to stay here to enjoy refreshments from our snacks or beverages bar. Or if you would like more fulfilling meals, we have